All right, you flashy fools. We are about to get into n equals target. You see that pseudocode over here? They're saying every time we find a target number in a list, we want to count that and then display that amount in the end. So let's get started. This is a little bit different because I already have the code here for you, and I'm just going to explain line by line how you read that. Make sure you are taking notes. On line 1, we instantiate a variable count and we give it a value of 0. This is what we're going to be using to index in our list. And if you skip down to 3, you'll see our list. Just a side note, I like to skip a couple lines just for reading clarity. You don't have to. It just makes it easier for me to read my code. So here you can see we have a list called list 1 with 10 items in the list. On line 5, we have another variable called target that is equal to 1. This means I am looking for the amount of ones that are in my list. Finally, for our variables, n equals 0 on line 7, that is the amount of times that I find my target in the list. And since we haven't gone through our list yet, it is 0. Now on line 9, we get into our for loop. Now it says for x in range the length of list 1. That's basically saying x represents a placeholder. It can literally be anything. I can go in here and change this to, I don't know, rice. Program runs the same way. I can change it to wubba lubba dub dub. Still, same thing. Doesn't matter what that is. Literally just a placeholder. It has a value that starts at 0 and then it increases as we continue with our iterations in the for loop. The range tells you how many times you are going to iterate or loop through your list. And since we're going through the length of our list, that is 10 times. As you can see here, 0 through 9, 10 times. On line 10, I'm printing out the amount of times we're looping through our list. Remember, count is representing our index here. So we're just going to print out how many times we count. Using this string function and convert our integer count into a string so we can concatenate using the concatenation operator here. Skipping to line 12, if the target is equal to list of count, meaning if you find it in this location, and so by that I mean count of 0 would be 1, count of 1 would be 2, count of 2 would be 3, and so on, so on. Then you just add 1 to the amount of times you found it. It's 0 currently, and then you add 1 every time you find that item in the list. This style of adding n equals n plus 1 is actually called incrementing. We're incrementing the value of that variable. On line 14, we print found the target just so we can keep track of how many times we find the target as we're iterating through our list. On line 17, you'll see count equals count plus 1. Again, incrementing the value of count every time we go through our list. This time it doesn't matter whether or not we find our target because we are going to add 1 every time we go through either way. I want to take this time to show you, earlier we said for the for loop on line 9, we can use any value and that it starts from 0 and goes up. We can actually replace that with count so that we can save some lines of code here and here. And if you run it, you'll see it's still the exact same code since count has a default value of 0 and goes up every time we iterate. And so the code will still be the same. Then on line 18, we print how many times we find our target. And since our target was 1, found 2 times, if I change it to 2, 3 times, if I change it to 3, 5 times. For the last thing that we'll go over, we'll talk about how we can actually take the user's input for our target instead of coding a static value. So we're just going to convert it to an integer because we